אז עכשיו אני מציגה את גולן רוטר הולץ, שהוא עובד סוציאלי קליני, מנחה סדנאות, מנחה קבוצות, סליחה. אמ, הוא מטפל רגשי, והוא ממייסדי הפחתה אחראית, והוא כזה יישא כמה דברי פתיחה. אז גולן.
אהלן.
היי.
אוקיי. אז שלום לכולם, שומעים אותי טוב? כן, אוקיי. אה, טוב, אז אני שמח מאוד להיות כאן ולראות אתכם, ותודה לכל מי שהגיע, ואנחנו מאוד מתרגשים, גם אני ושאר הצוות שנמצאים כאן, וננחה את הקבוצות. אני אחר כך אציג את הקבוצות ואותם, ואני רוצה גם בהזדמנות הזאת להודות להם, ולנוגה שעוזרת לנו עם כל האירוע הזה. אה, אז אני רוצה לפתוח עם איזשהו סיפור על שיחת טלפון שקיבלתי. אה, השיחה הזאת הייתה בערך ב6:30 בבוקר. התקשרה אליי מישהי שאמרה לי, אה, אני מצטערת שאני מתקשרת אליך בשעה הזאת, אני לא יודעת מה לעשות. ואז היא התחילה לבכות. אמרה לי שהיא ירדה מציפרלקס לפני שבועיים, והיא כל היום בוכה, והיא לא אוכלת ולא ישנה, והיא לא מבינה מה קורה לגוף שלה, ויש לה 2 ילדים, והיא מתחננת שמישהו יעזור לה. לצערי, את השיחה הזאת קיבלתי כמה וכמה פעמים. אה, שיחה שחוזרת על עצמה של אנשים במצוקה, שירדו מציפרלקס או מתרופה אחרת. הרבה פעמים גם איך שהפסיכיאטרים שלהם אמרו להם, או איך שרופאי משפחה אמרו להם לרדת, ו... ואז הגיעו לאיזושהי מצוקה כזאת, שהם לא יודעים למי לפנות, והם מרגישים שהעולם שלהם קורס עליהם. אז אני חושב אז יש חדשות רעות בעניין הזה ויש חדשות טובות. אז החדשות הרעות זה אולי שאנחנו עדיין ממשיכים לקבל שיחות ומיילים כאלה בעמותה. וזה לא נראה שזה ממש הולך להשתנות בקרוב. אבל החדשות הטובות זה שיש היום הרבה יותר מידע לגבי איך לעשות את התהליך הזה. יש הרבה יותר אנשי מקצוע, פסיכיאטרים, מטפלים, עובדים סוציאליים, פסיכולוגים וכדומה, שמעורבים בנושא הזה, שמכירים אותו. יש הרבה יותר אנשים שמכירים את הנושא הזה, ויש תנועה עולמית רחבה שמציעה אלטרנטיבות, מציעה דרכים אחרות לרדת מתרופות פסיכיאטריות, שבכלל מסתכלת על מצבים נפשיים בצורה אחרת ממה שהסתכלו עליהם עד כה. אולי לא כמצבים כרוניים וכמצבים שלא ניתנים לשינוי על ידי שהם קשורים רק בביולוגיה ובגנטיקה ובצורה כזאת, אלא מסתכלת בצורה יותר הוליסטית. אז יש חדשות טובות בעניין הזה, והיום האירוע הזה, ההרצאה של אנדרס, הוא חלק מהשינוי הזה. וההימצאות שלנו כעמותה, כבר כשנתיים בשטח כעמותה רשומה, וכבר כמעט 7 שנים כתנועה שקיימת, כן, יש כאן איזשהו שינוי ובשורה להרבה אנשים. הדבר הנוסף שרציתי לספר עליו זה על דברים שראיתי ב5 שנים האלה שאני מתעסק עם זה, שאיזה שהם אולי 3 תמות שאפשר לראות בתהליך שאנשים פונים להפחתה אחראית. אז חשבתי על פחד, אומץ ובדידות. בכל הדבר הראשון זה פחד, כי אני חושב שהפחד מופיע משני הצדדים, או מכמה צדדים. יש פחד של אנשים שניסו לרדת מהתרופה פעם או פעמיים, זה לא הצליח להם, חוו חוויה איומה, ואז יש פחד נורא גדול מלהגיע למצב קצה כזה עוד פעם, ולמצוא את עצמך באיזה מקום שאתה לא מבין איך הגעת אליו. וכשאנשים כבר עושים את ההפחתה ומגיעים לצורה אחרת של הפחתה, אז גם מלווה בפחד של מה יכול לקרות לי, איך זה יכול להשתבש הדבר הזה, ולפעמים זה גם יכול להשתבש. אז אני חושב שהתהליך הזה גם מלווה בפחד אצל הבן אדם עצמו, אבל גם פחד של הסביבה, ממה יכול לקרות כשבן אדם יורד מתרופות פסיכיאטריות. אז, וגם אנשי מקצוע שמלווים גם מפחדים מהדבר הזה. אז יש המון פחד סביב הרצון הזה בכלל להפסיק תרופות, ואולי גם יש פחד מלהישאר על התרופה לאורך זמן, מה זה יכול לעשות, ואיך זה, ו, ומה זה בשבילי ככה. הדבר הנוסף זה אומץ, שאני חושב שכל מי שמגיע לכאן צריך איזה כורטוב של אומץ כדי לעסוק בדבר הזה, לחשוב אותו. אנחנו מבינים שזו סיטואציה שלפעמים היא מאוד מורכבת, שנוגעת בשאלות מהותיות על מחירים ועל תועלות של טיפול תרופתי ועל צורות שונות של טיפול, שהם לא טיפול תרופתי, ואני חושב שצריך הרבה תמיכה ואומץ כדי בכלל לצאת למסע הזה. והדבר הנוסף זה בדידות, שאני חושב שהתהליך הזה הוא הרבה פעמים בין אדם לבין עצמו. יש אנשים שמעורבים בדבר הזה, אבל לא תמיד, ובכל מקרה התהליך מהצד, למי שלא מעורה בפרטים ולמי שלא מבין את גודל האירוע הזה, זה יכול להיראות, יכול להישמע אמירות כמו, מה אכפת לך כבר, תיקח את התרופה וזהו. או מה אתה מתקטנן על מיליגרם פה, מיליגרם שם, והדבר הזה מעמיק תחושה של בדידות בעצם, כי אנשים מנסים לעשות משהו שהוא באמת מורכב, ללכת בהפחתה אחראית, איך שאנחנו חושבים עליה היום ומציעים אותה כהפחתה מאוד הדרגתית. אנדרס ידבר על זה, אני לא אכביר על זה במילים, אבל זה תהליך לפעמים מורכב וסיזיפי ושלא קל לעשות אותו, ויש בו גם בדידות בתהליך הזה. אני אוסיף, אני הכנתי איזושהי מצגת קצרה על כמה דברים שאני כן רוצה להראות. אז אני רגע אפתח את זה. שנייה. רואים?
כן, אנחנו רואים.
אוקיי. רק תגידו לי אם רואים גם שזה עובר למצגת, והם רואים שזה עובר חלון.
רואים.
רואים? אוקיי. אז אני אגיד שעמותת הפחתה אחראית עומדת על שני עמודים עיקריים, ואחד מהם זה האפשרות לבחור. הבחירה לבחור אחרת עם מה לעשות עם הטיפול התרופתי, איך לעשות את זה, והדבר השני הוא הזכות לדעת. האפשרות לדעת, גם כשאני נכנס לטיפול תרופתי, מה ההשלכות של זה, גם כשאני יוצא מטיפול תרופתי, מה ההשלכות של זה, ואיך לעשות את הדברים. אנחנו חושבים, כן, בעמותה שיש חוסר כרגע בידע בחוץ, ועל זה בעצם אנחנו נשענים ועומדים, ושואלים שאלות של, האם לקחת טיפול תרופתי, מה יכול להיות, למה אני לוקח טיפול תרופתי, כמה מבחינת המינון, כמה מבחינת הזמן, ואיך אני משתמש בטיפול התרופתי הזה, איך אני משתמש בדברים אחרים, ואיך אני יורד לבסוף מהטיפול התרופתי. כדבר שיש לו התחלה וסוף, אם אני בוחר להשתמש בו בצורה חכמה. ואני חושב שכשאנחנו מדברים גם על הפחתה אחראית, אנחנו לא מדברים רק על הפחתה של תרופות, אנחנו מדברים גם על הפחתה של סטיגמה, אנחנו מדברים גם על הפחתה של הבחנות, אנחנו מדברים גם על הפחתה של בושה ושל עוד רגשות שמעורבים, וכן החייאה של רגשות אחרים שאולי אנשים לא באו במגע איתם כשהם היו טיפול תרופתי. ואני אציג לכם 4 בעיות עיקריות שאנחנו יכולים לראות מהפרספקטיבה שלנו. אז בעיה אחת שטיפול תרופתי לעתים קרובות ניתן לזמן לא מוגבל, לא משהו שתוחמים אותו בזמן, וזה אכן בעיה כי זה משאיר אנשים על תרופה למשך הרבה מאוד זמן, לפעמים המעקב בכלל לא נעשה מעקב על ידי פסיכיאטר, ואז גם, וגם לא בטיפול, פשוט משהו שבן אדם לוקח לאורך זמן, ואז כשבן אדם רוצה לרדת מהתרופה, הוא נתקל בבעיה. ככל שמשך הזמן של השימוש עולה, אנחנו יודעים שיותר קשה לרדת. יש הנחיות שגויות או לא נכונות, היום אנחנו יודעים להפסקה, הנחיות מאוד מהירות שמובילות, יכולות להוביל למשברים, לאשפוזים, לקשיים. אנחנו יודעים שזה לא לכולם ככה, בסדר? אנחנו מכירים בזה שלחלק מהאנשים יהיה בסדר לרדת מטיפול תרופתי, אולי יהיה להם קשה למשך תקופה מסוימת, אבל הם יכולים לעבור את זה גם בצורות אחרות של הפחתה, שהן יותר מהירות. אבל אנחנו גם יודעים שלחלק מהאנשים זה יהיה דבר בלתי נסבל, קשה לשאת, ויכול להוביל למצבים גם מסוכנים וקשים. ובשביל זה אנחנו כאן. מה שמוביל לבעיה הנוספת, שיש היעדר של תיקוף בעצם לחוויה של הגמילה, בעצם בכלל לקרוא לזה גמילה, כי זה קצת מורכב, אנדרס ידבר על זה קצת, שזה לא בדיוק התמכרות, זה כן, אבל איזשהו ביטוי של תלות במערכת, אבל יש בהחלט היעדר מידע לאנשי מקצוע, וגם לאנשים בציבור הכללי, על הדבר הזה כגמילה. אני לא מזמן הייתי באיזה מרכז להתמכרויות ודיברתי איתם על הנושא של גמילה ושל מזעור נזקים. הם עושים שם הרבה עבודה כזאת של קבוצות עם התמכרויות, אבל זה לא נחשב להתמכרות, אז לא עושים לזה קבוצה למשל, אוקיי? אז זה עדיין לא בשיח הרווח. והבעיה הנוספת האחרונה זה בעצם שיש היעדר של מידע טכני מהותי, שאם בן אדם כן רוצה עכשיו לעשות הפחתה מדורגת, אחראית, כפי שאנדרס יסביר אותה, אה, אין לו מספיק את המידע המדויק, איך לעשות את זה, איך לקטוש את הכדורים שלו, איך להפוך אותם למיליגרמים. חברות התרופות לא מייצרות מינונים מאוד מאוד נמוכים של התרופה, זה משהו שצריך לעשות אותו בעצמך או לקנות אותו בבית מרקחת מיוחד, והמידע הזה חסר. אנשים מחפשים מידע ואנחנו משתדלים לתרגם הרבה מידע ולתת הרבה מידע, אבל זה עדיין לא מספיק, והדבר הזה צריך גם להשתנות. אז אנחנו מדגישים את השיטה שנקראת ההיפרבוליק טייפרינג, ואנדרס ירחיב על זה, ובנוסף הפעולות שאנחנו עושים, אנחנו מלמדים אנשי מקצוע, אנחנו תומכים ואנחנו מלווים אנשים בדרך הזאת בכל מיני צורות. רגע, טיפול אחד, נסיים את זה. אז אתם רואים את זה עכשיו? כן. אז אנחנו מחוברים לארגונים עולמיים שעוסקים בדבר הזה. יש כאן את הארגון הבינלאומי, את ה-PDW, יש כאן את Loving Antidepressants, שפורום מאוד גדול, עולמי, ועוד ועוד, ארגונים מארצות הברית. ואני אגיד שגם בארץ אנחנו חלק מתנועה מקומית שעושה שינוי בבריאות הנפש, דברים כמו דיאלוג פתוח, סוטריה, בתים מאזנים, רשת שומעי קולות, נביגייט. אנחנו חלק מתנועה רחבה שעושה שינוי. ואני אגיד עוד משהו על הפרספקטיבה שלנו, כי זה חלק מההסתכלות בכלל הוא אחר. אני הבאתי פה ציטוט של תומאס אוגדן, שהוא פסיכואנליטיקאי, שאומר שהדיכאון של כל אדם הוא יצירתו הייחודית שלו, מושרש בנסיבות הייחודיות של חוויות חייו ובארגון אישיותו. זה דוגמה כדי להגיד שהבעיה היא לא תמיד דומה לכולם, ולכן גם המענה הוא לא תמיד דומה. והטיפול תרופתי הוא יכול להתאים לאנשים מסוימים, ולאנשים מסוימים לא. וזה דבר שככה כהסתכלות הוא מוביל אותנו, ו- ובכלל אנחנו עומדים בגישה הביולוגית הרפואית שמדברת על היעדר איזון כימי אל מול אה, גישה ומענים שהם הרבה יותר רחבים מטיפול תרופתי לטיפול בכל מיני אספקטים, אספקט רוחני, אספקט סוציאלי, אספקט פסיכו-סוציאלי, אספקט ביולוגי, גישה שהיא יותר רחבה ולוקחת בחשבון יותר את סביבת האדם ואת הבעיות שיש לו בחיים.
גולן רק אומרת שיש איזושהי הערה על זה שיש קצת, וזה באמת נכון, הקול שלך נשמע, שומעים אותך די ברור, אבל עדיין יש קצת, אם יש משהו שאתה יכול לעשות עם המיקרופון, עם החיבור לאינטרנט.
אוקיי, אז אוי, אז אני אחליף רגע אה, שנייה. אה, שיט. עכשיו לא רואים את המצגת, נכון?
עכשיו לא רואים את המצגת.
אבל כן שומעים אותי. טוב, אין לי הרבה מה לעשות עם זה כרגע, אבל
אתה רוצה לשלוח לי את המצגת ואני אעשה, טוב, יש לנו 10 דקות, אבל אני אפשר,
רגע, אני אנסה להיכנס גם, הנה.
רק תוודא שאתה משתיק את המחשב אם אתה נכנס למקביל, כדי שלא
כן.
לא יהיה,
אז שומעים אותי עכשיו ואני נכנס במקביל, נכון?
כן,
אוקיי, שנייה. כן, אין לנו באמת הרבה זמן, אז אני אשתדל רגע לחזור לזה מהר. רואים עכשיו?
כן,
אוקיי.
יפה.
אוקיי, אז על זה דיברנו. טוב, אז אני אציג את קבוצות השיח שלנו היום, אני ממש ממש מזמין אתכם להישאר איתנו אחרי ההרצאה של אנדרס. לקבוצות השיח זו הזדמנות בשבילנו כקהילה, כאנשים, כאנשי מקצוע, כמטפלים, כמטופלים, מי שאתם להשתתף באחת מקבוצות השיח שלנו, שאתם תבחרו לאן להיכנס. אז אנחנו מדברים על הקבוצה הראשונה היא על הזכות להשתגע, היא על בין אדם לעצמו, על נשיאת מצבי קצה, על מה זה קצה, על המחירים, על התועלות, איך בכלל, האם אפשר להשתגע ואיך אפשר להיות בתוך זה ועוד ועוד. ינחו את הקבוצה מאיה קרמר וטי אהרון זיו, שני מנחים מצוינים שיעשו איתכם את הדיון בקבוצה הזאת. הקבוצה השנייה היא בין אדם למטפל, אז תהיה על השיח בין מטפלים ומטופלים, איך מתערבים, איך מדברים על טיפול תרופתי, איך מדברים על הפסקה של טיפול תרופתי, גם למטפלים, גם למטופלים, להיכנס לשיחה סביב הדבר הזה, ואני אנחה את זה ביחד עם אדווה גפן, הקבוצה השלישית, בין אדם למשפחתו, על קשר, ליווי ותמיכה, על איך תומכים בהחלטה הזאת, איך משפחה יכולה להיות חלק מההחלטה הזאת וכדומה. אז הקבוצה הזאת תונחה על ידי שמעון כץ ועומרי אברמוביץ'. מזמין אתכם מאוד להשתתף בקבוצות, אנחנו ככה עבדנו סביב זה, והמנחים באמת מחכים לפגוש אתכם בקבוצות האלה. מבחינת החזון שלנו כעמותה, אנחנו רוצים לסייע לאנשים לבחור בחירה מושכלת ואחראית ביחס לשימוש ולהפחתה של תרופות פסיכיאטריות, ואנחנו עושים את זה על ידי מידע שהוא מבוסס מחקר, אנחנו בעצמנו עושים עכשיו מחקר, ואנחנו רצינו להציג תוצאות שלו, אבל אנחנו עוד טיפה, תכף יגיעו התוצאות שלו, אבל אנחנו עובדים על מחקר, ואנחנו עובדים על תמיכה וסיוע ועל הכשרה לאנשי מקצוע, ולכן זה החזון שלנו, להקים מרכז ידע, הכשרה ולתת טיפול וסיוע, גם בצורה יותר מסודרת בעתיד. משהו שלפני שנה עשינו בעצם את הערב השקה שלנו במכללה האקדמית תל אביב-יפו, עם יותר מ-200 אנשים, שרוב האנשים יצאו מזה עם הרבה תקווה, זו המילה שאנשים כתבו הכי הרבה. היה לנו את ההרצאה עם דוקטור מרק הורוביץ, ראיין אותו פרופסור פסח ליכטנברג, היא הרצאה שמופיעה באתר שלנו בחינם, אתם יכולים לצפות בה, דוקטור מרק הורוביץ הוא ההורים והתומים בנושא הזה של הפחתה אחראית. עוד דבר שעשינו היה גם הסמינר הכשרה שלנו למטפלים, אנחנו גם באים למקומות של מטפלים, גם עשינו סמינר אינטרנטי על איך לדבר עם המטופלים, על שימוש והפסקה של תרופות פסיכיאטריות, אז גם אם אתם אנשי מקצוע, אנחנו גם נשמח להעביר את הידע הזה הלאה. זהו, בסך הכל. אני אגיד זו הזדמנות מיוחדת ללמוד בשבילנו, וגם הזדמנות להיפתח לקהילה, ואנחנו גם מזמינים אתכם אחר כך להגיד לנו איך היה לכם בכנס, ומה למדתם, ואיך אתם רוצים לקחת חלק בעמותה, אם אנשים רוצים כאן לקחת חלק, להצטרף, אז אנחנו פתוחים לרעיונות. שוב להגיד לכם תודה שבאתם לכאן היום, להיות חלק מהתנועה הזאת, ולהגיד תודה שוב לכל המנחים שלנו, שבאים בשמחה לכנס הזה, וגם לאנדרס שינחה, וגם לקרן טאובר שתומכת בנו, ולגדי תירוש שתומך בנו, ואנחנו כן גם בנושא הזה של תרומות, מודים לכם על התרומה שלכם, וכל מי שחושב שהוא יכול לעזור לנו לקבל תרומות, אז גם הזדמנות להגיד שאנחנו נשמח. אוקיי, נוגה, אנדרס נמצא פה?
אוקיי, אז ברוכים הבאים, זה אנדרס, PhD, רגע אחד, אז הוא מדנמרק, הוא פסיכולוג קליני, חוקר וסופר, מומחה בגמילה לתרופות פסיכיאטריות, הדוקטורט שלו הוא בנוירוביולוגיה, והדגש של המחקר שלו הוא לסייע לאנשים להפחית את התרופות באופן בטוח באמצעות הפחתות הדרגתיות במינון, תוך ליווי בתהליך הפסיכותרפי של התמודדות עם רגשות, דפוסי חשיבה או תגובות טראומטיות שיכולות לעלות מחדש בזמן הגמילה. ויש לו ספר שיצא בשנה האחרונה שקוראים לו The Art and Science of Coming Off and Staying Off Psychiatric Drugs, סליחה, Crossing Zero, The Art and Science of Coming Off and Staying Off Psychiatric Drugs. הוא יצא ממש לא מזמן, הוא נחשב לאחד הקולות המרכזיים בעולם בנושא של הפסקת תרופות באופן בטוח ואחראי. וזהו, גולן עוד מילה או שנתחיל פשוט?
Anders, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, of course. Love to be here.
We really appreciate it, and we are waiting to hear you. So you are all the audience, and the stage is for you.
Yes.
Yeah. How many are here? I can't see anyone.
It's
like 80 people.
Oh, great.
Yes, and there are some more people, at least 20 more people. We'll get it recording later. There's a big community in Israel that is waiting for this knowledge.
It's now 150 people registered. So
okay, great. So there's a growing community in Israel recognizing the issues.
Yes.
Yes. Great. Just let me know when to start.
Yes, now you can start.
Perfect. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is the first talk I've been giving in or to Israel, and I'm currently in Phoenix, Arizona, road tripping with Angie Peacock, if someone happens to know her, who's also in the withdrawal and TIPA community. So I'm sitting in the heat. So it's actually 10 a.m. my time now because I'm in the US. But yeah, thanks so much for having me. My name is Anders Sørensen. I'm a Danish clinical psychologist, who did my PhD in psychiatry on psychiatric drug withdrawal and safe tapering. And so long story short, I found it difficult 10 years ago when I finished my training as a psychologist. I found it surprisingly difficult to do the therapy I was trained in with medicated clients. For example, if the emotions are not there, or thoughts are distorted or slowed down or altered in any way, it's difficult to work with them. It's difficult to work with people's emotions if they're not there or if they've changed their appearance, their nature. So quickly, I got a hold of a bunch of clients for whom the next step in therapy was to come off these medications to figure out what was underneath. And back then, 10 years ago, I didn't know a whole lot about tapering, so I just followed the standard guidelines, trusted, okay, I'm sure they're fine. There's probably some evidence behind them, and tried to help my patients come off these psychiatric drugs. And it was then that I saw, just right in front of me, that these drugs were way harder to come off than I was just taught at university, and that my clients were taught, and still to this day, 10 years later, I'm sure it's the same in Israel, are taught. So it was kind of that observation clinically right in front of me. I decided to go with my client's experience instead of what was in the books, and that's still the path I'm walking on here today. So I did a PhD on that, and recently a book, which was out in Danish a couple of years ago. And this is then the English translation, Crossing Zero, the Art and Science of Coming Off and Staying Off Psychiatric Drugs. So it's a long title, and that's deliberate, because when you hear me talking about helping people come off psychiatric drugs, and I should say all psychiatric drugs, antidepressants, benzos, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, the principle is the same, and I'll get back to that. When I say I help people come off, I really mean two things. I mean the actual technicalities of the tapering, like how to reduce the dose gradually and slowly, sometimes over years, in such a way that it doesn't cause too much withdrawal. So that's the technicalities of that, the hyperbolic principles. I'll get back to those. And I've heard you had Mark Horowitz on last year, so maybe I can skip some of it, but maybe just to repeat. And then I also mean helping people manage their lives without psychiatric drugs. So if you've been used to, for better or worse, have your emotions and your mind and your awareness numbed or altered in some way, there's going to be a transition to having that full, messy range of human emotion back. So I really mean both. I want to help people come off and stay off psychiatric drugs. And that's why the book is structured as it is. You'd see part 2 is the actual tapering part. And you'll notice that actually the first reduction is mentioned no earlier than page 147, because I really want to help people reflect on their beliefs about and their ideas about how these drugs even work, what they do to them, and what their suffering is about. Hence the chapter 3, our mental health problems, diseases of the brain. Again, we want to help people come off and avoid withdrawal, and we want to help people avoid true relapse. So I'm sure most of you would be familiar with the problem in a nutshell of coming off psychiatric drugs is that the symptoms of an incorrect taper, a too fast taper, will overlap hugely with the symptoms of the disorder or some other disorder. So that's really the problem in a nutshell. If someone reduces a psychiatric drug and gets symptoms, what is that? Is it, and it can be at least two things. Is it you underneath the drug? Like, is it how you're actually doing underneath the drug effect, or is it a withdrawal effect? Hence the taper. But we also really want to help people avoid relapse. And I'll get back to this maybe if we get to it today, but in terms of avoiding relapse, the thing that's not withdrawal, the very idea that you have an underlying mental illness, a biological problem that's called this or that, and that can kind of just flare up on its own accord. There's a random element to it, the medical model, that's going to become a barrier. It's really a problem. That's why chapter 3 is there. So if we want to help people avoid relapse of depression, anxiety, psychosis, stress, whatever, we got to help the person see that those episodes, they'd have a context around them. They'd be triggers. And the psychological way to help people prevent relapse is to figure out what that context is. So what is it that happens leading up to your relapses? And in that question, the idea that you have a brain disease where there's this kind of random element to it becomes a barrier. That's why helping people off psychiatric drugs can oftentimes involve these somewhat deeper things. And what I really also want to bring to the table and to the to the wider conversation about coming off psychiatric drugs is the emotional part, hence part 3 of the book. So once you're off the drug and your taper went fine,
And
we have to understand. Yes?
excuse me, there's a request that you will talk a little slower.
Also, sorry.
So that people who speak English but can follow, and also so that the translator who writes in Hebrew as you speak.
Sorry, there's someone writing.
No, it's okay. Don't apologize.
Sorry.
Just asking it.
Good that you said that.
Okay, Shira, do you want me to put you on to unmute you so that you can ask if you need? Okay, so I will let the translator ask for herself.
Okay, yes. You can continue.
תודה, שירה, תודה.
I'll continue. Great. So far the point is just that we have to understand that when we come off psychiatric drugs or reduce the dose, 2 things can happen. One thing is withdrawal, which is just the body's signs that a drug is, the body signals that a drug is leaving it too fast for it to keep up right away. That's what causes the withdrawal. But also understanding, and that's why the questions connect with each other, how to come off a psychiatric drug and how they even work are connected questions. And that's what I'm trying to make the main focus of my talk. So once you understand that a psychiatric drug doesn't technically remove anything, it just creates another emotional state on top of your underlying emotions, it kind of makes sense that coming off the drug also means that emotions resurface. So one thing is the technicalities of coming off, and then I also want to help people to, navigate and understand that emotional landscape that resurfaces once you come off the psychiatric drugs, which is the part 3 of the book.
Excuse me.
So it really, sorry.
Please try to speak a little bit slower so I can follow.
Even slower. I will. Sorry, I'm not used to, but it's good that you say it here in the beginning. Okay. So the question of how to come off these psychiatric drugs, how to taper, really starts with understanding a little bit about how they work. And luckily, that is way more, it's simpler than you'd think. So I'd like to start with some somewhat geeky pharmacology here today. So what we have to understand is that all psychiatric drugs, antidepressants, benzos, antipsychotics, stimulants, mood stabilizers, those are the 5 overall categories. The principle on which they work is the same. So let's just get it short. They enter the brain. So we all have a brain and a nervous system. And around that brain is something called the blood-brain barrier. It's abbreviated as BBB. What all psychiatric drugs are designed to do is to penetrate that. So all psychiatric drugs penetrate the blood-brain barrier, they enter the brain, and then they're constructed in laboratories to seek out specific neurotransmitters and receptors in the brain. And that's what gives us the different categories of psychiatric drugs. So you could think of it this way, and I'm trying to make it easier for people to understand. Different psychiatric drugs affect different neurotransmitters in different combinations. And that's what gives you the 5 different drug classes. But the overall mechanism and how they work is exactly the same. And that's important to know because that's when you really start to understand that the principles of tapering and avoiding withdrawal are also the same. So while all these different words may look confusing and complicated, what I want you to take away from today is the overall principles of how they work. So brain cells communicate via neurotransmitters, as most of them have reached our, ordinary language, serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline, and so on. And it's just like we humans, we use speech and, and movements to communicate, and then we have ears to receive the message. That's exactly how neurotransmitters work too. And all psychiatric drugs do is mess with this system. They can turn up or they can turn down. And the way I show it in the book, and please you don't need to understand each little plus or each little minus for today. That's irrelevant. You just need to understand the overall principle. So what I'm trying to show here is that all psychiatric drugs can actually be fit into the same table. It's just a matter of different pluses and minuses. So what the drug can do when it finds its receptor, it can either activate it or deactivate it. So it can increase or decrease the level or activity of certain neurotransmitters. So you can really fit all different drugs into the same table. And this is in the book. You can go look up the details if you want, but it's the overall principle that applies. As you can see, the SSRIs are in fact fairly selective to serotonin, but there's a little bit more pluses and minuses. And then we have the SNRIs, which are a bit broader. And I'm going to go over these a bit quick just to show you the overall principle. And my goal here is to help you understand that it's really one principle you need to understand in terms of how they work and how to come off. And you'll see here the old tricyclics, they're way broader. There's a category of atypical antidepressants. Here goes the antipsychotics. You can see they're way stronger. And that's the first difference between antidepressants and antipsychotics. Principle is still the same, but they're way, way, way stronger drugs. And I'm just going to go over these a bit fast just to show you. Here we have the benzos. That's a bit easier to understand. They all work on the same system. And the stimulants. So all psychiatric drugs do is enter the brain and increase or decrease different combinations of neurotransmitters. And that's what gives us the different categories. Just a short note on how psychiatric drugs work. And I hope you can see the relevance of this. Now someone is drawing on my, I don't know if you can see that. I certainly can't erase it. So what's really important to understand is that no one disagrees that psychiatric drugs work by entering the brain and altering brain chemistry. What there is some debate about, less and less, at least here, is what that then means. So there are this table does not discuss whether, it's not about whether psychiatric drugs work or not. It's about how they work, when they work. And there are two overall models or theories behind this. The one is the classical, you'd call it the medical model. You would call it the disease-centered model after Joanna Moncrief and David Cohen's article back in 2005. And that's really the classical psychiatric understanding of how psychiatric drugs work. That means that if the patient gets better and improves in any way from taking the medication, there is this assumption that that drug has corrected some underlying abnormal brain state or imbalance. And that's where you have the myth of these chemical imbalances. So the idea being that if a drug works, it's because it has effectively targeted something in the brain that was abnormal, pathological, disordered. And we don't need to know what it is, but we just have an idea that that's why it works. And that model, as I could talk about for hours and hours, and maybe we'll do that another time because that'll steal our all time. It's been really difficult for psychiatry to prove that, to have some actual evidence on that one. But it's still the one being told, at least to most people here in my country, in the US. And I could only assume that it would be the same in Israel too. The other model is called the drug-centered model. And again, this is not about whether the drugs work or not. It's about how they work, when they work. So here, it's a much simpler explanation, really, because we're trying to approach psychiatric drugs as drugs and not medications. So here we have an idea that if a psychiatric drugs work, it's really just because it creates an abnormal brain state, which we then experience as an altered mental, emotional, physiological state. So the difference is that here, we try to approach it as this. Our subjective experience of having our neurotransmitters turns up or down just so happens to be an altered emotional state. And what most people, not all, but most people would describe if you ask them what the effect of the drug is, it's some kind of numbing and narrowing, like as if the emotional range is, getting smaller. It's reduced, which could be incredibly relieving in a situation of great distress. But it's not rocket science, to see the problem. Like if you keep numbing your emotions beyond the acute crisis, it's going to be a problem for some time. Emotions are that's why we do things. We do things because it's going to feel a certain way, and we know that. So motivation is really at the core of human motivation. We do things, the grander scheme of things, because we know that it's going to feel a certain way to do it. So with that feedback system numbed or restricted by psychiatric drugs, it's no wonder that psychiatric drugs beyond the actual acute state can turn into a problem. And I think that's why we see that most people, when we come off these drugs slowly, gradually, in the principles I'm about to explain, they usually get better from coming off them if, and only if, we do it slowly enough as to not cause too much withdrawal, and if we help them navigate and make sense of and manage those emotions that of course will resurface once you remove the lid, so to speak. So here we have to understand psychiatric drugs they technically don't remove anything. Even when they work, it's not that they removed anything. What they did instead, and this is really important also to tapering, what they did was they actually created another state, another emotional state on top of the way we truly feel, which can be unpleasant. They create another state on top that if the drug is strong enough, that's the one we're going to feel. It doesn't mean that it removed anything or deleted anything or resolved anything. It just created another state on top as an alternative to the way we truly feel. And there's no difference between this and then how, say, painkillers work. Opioids, for example, they don't remove pain. They just block the receptors that the neurotransmitter that communicates pain to us uses. So if we block the receptors, and I hope you can see the overlap between that and mental health issues. If you block the pain signal, you won't feel the pain, but the body will still send pain signals. Or if you drink coffee, for example, sorry to maybe ruin the coffee drinking experience for some of you out there. I drink coffee too. Coffee doesn't make us less tired. It makes us feel less tired because it blocks the receptors that adenosine uses, which is the neurotransmitter that communicates to us how tired we are. So now you'd see the difference. So you see the similarity between coffee, painkillers, and then psychiatric drugs. What we just need to understand is that with psychiatric drugs, it's the more, fluffy emotions and thoughts and trauma reactions that it can numb. But the actual effect, or the way we should talk about them, I hope makes sense for you, that it's really the same. So a psychiatric drug is just a drug. If it works, it's because the drug effect, for some reason, for that person in that situation, feels better than the pain they're in. And also the difference between these models is that there's a lot of questions to ask there. Instead of just saying, okay, the patient got the right drug at the right dose because they feel better, in the drug-centered model, what I would ask, it would be straightforward to ask the person, well, what is it that feels so relieving not to feel? What is it inside you that feels so painful and overwhelming and maybe incomprehensible that it feels relieving not to feel it? So you see how we would have a lot of different questions to be asked instead of just accepting, okay, you feel better, therefore you are better. So I think a lot of people confuse feeling less or being in a drug effect with feeling better. So, and that's part of coming off the psychiatric drugs too. You'll see this in the first many chapters of the book. I try to help people understand their medication in this light, because it's not just about the taper. Emotions will resurface too. And emotions and impulses and thoughts, I'm sure all of you know, these are strong forces. Like an emotion is a strong thing. It has to be, because it's trying to move us That's why it's called an emotion. It's a body signal that it's trying to move us in certain directions. And for an emotion to be able to do that, it has to be a strong force. So the transition from having had your mind numbed or altered to then reintroducing into a, quote, normal emotional life, if we don't help people through it, depending on how strong the drug effect is, of course, it's going to be overwhelming for a lot of people. So a lot of what I do helping people come off psychiatric drugs is the reductions, the dose reductions, obviously, but then the other half of it is making sense of those emotions. So sometimes I do it could almost be like an emotions 101. And I had an article up in Mad in America and something on my Substack about this recently. Like often with my clients, I find myself doing this basic stuff. What is an emotion? What is anxiety? What is sadness? What is anger? What is shame? Because I want people to not fear it and be in it, because a lot of my clients, at least, they've learned from psychiatry to fear emotions because they've been gotten so used to calling it symptoms. And then it is something negative to rid ourselves of. And it's the exactly opposite thing we're trying to do in psychotherapy. So a lot of the work I do, I promise I'll get into the tapering in just a moment, is helping people repair their beliefs about themselves and their emotional states from something pathological to something meaningful that we can be in and regulate with different sorts of psychotherapeutic techniques too. Okay, sorry. And from a psychological approach, because remember, I am a clinical psychologist by training, this way of talking about psychiatric drugs and how they work really overlaps with what we'd call emotion regulation in psychology. So there's this definition. It's very broad. It's defined as processes by which individuals influence which emotions they have, when they have them, and how they experience and express those emotions, or actions taken by a person to change emotions or increase or decrease their intensity. What made me as a psychologist finally dare and feel skilled enough and equipped enough and confident enough to stepping into psychiatrist territory, which is not traditionally a therapist's territory, was understanding psychiatric drugs in this way. A psychiatric drug is a process by which so-and-so, and it is an action taken by a person to change emotions. But of course, if you understand psychiatric drugs as these very specific brain-altering treatments that fix something, obviously, most other professions and therapists would not step into that territory because it's not ours. And I'm just saying this for the therapists out there and any other profession than doctors. If you know how to talk about emotion regulation and strategies and things people do to cope with their pain, you just need to understand that that's a psychiatric drug is just another strategy to do that. It just so happens to be a medical one. So this changes things completely. But, and this is where the tapering part ends, even if we approach it as a strategy, we have to understand that the body still doesn't like being interfered with. And this is what sets the stage for withdrawal. So you can think of it this way. For each plus on that table I showed you before, and which I'll happily share with you afterwards, or it's in the book, for each plus, the body will introduce a corresponding minus. And for each minus, the body will add a plus. And this is what we'd call adaptation. It just means that if we increase neurotransmitters over long enough time, you can be sure that the body will adapt by downregulating it. And if we decrease it, the body will adapt by upregulating it. And this is what is called homeostasis. It's the biological principle underpinning dependence and withdrawal and the need for tapering. And it just simply means that the body adapts to what we do to it long term. It comes to expect. So if we increase, say, serotonin or whatever other neurotransmitters, if we do that for long enough time, the body will start expecting it. It means it adapts. And we can illustrate this in a very simple drawing. So again, these are two neurotransmitters communicating. And in this example, they use serotonin. What most SSRIs do, some people think that there's serotonin in the pill. There's not serotonin in the pill, and nobody claims that. There's something in the pill that makes the brain's own levels of serotonin rise, increase. And it does so by, it's not so important, but for those of you who want to know, it does so by blocking the mechanism that would otherwise remove it from the synapse. So now we've effectively increased the level of serotonin. So if there was a chemical imbalance to begin with, the problem would now be solved. We've increased something that we needed. Okay? As soon as you understand that there's no imbalance in that system to begin with, it starts to make sense that the body adapts, and we'd usually illustrate it like this. So we artificially, chemically increase a neurotransmitter, the brain chemistry, and the body knows that. The body can see that this is a non-unnatural, artificial, chemically induced increase. It knows that. So even though the neurotransmitters that all these psychiatric drugs affect, they're natural. Serotonin is natural. Dopamine is natural. The drug in itself is not. It's a foreign substance, as the body is clever enough to know that. So it starts down regulating. So what we see is purely and simply that if we elevate serotonin, the body just reduces its sensitivity to that serotonin. That's the homeostasis again. Homeostasis means the body's search for balance. And the best example I can use is temperature, for example. If we walk out into the heat or into a sauna, our body temperature increases, but it doesn't just increase and increase and increase. Our body does something to downregulate. It starts to sweat. And if we walk into the cold, body temperature drops. So that's an imbalance. And the body starts to shake and shiver to generate heat. So you'd see this overall mechanism where the body's constantly trying to keep equilibrium or balance. And what we have to understand is that brain chemistry is under homeostatic principles too. So we can't increase serotonin or any other neurotransmitter without the brain adapting. And what it does is it simply removes the receptors responsible for receiving it. When that happens, and this can take, for benzos, it can take weeks. For antidepressants, it can take months or even a year. From this point on, you are literally dependent on the drug because the body expects that exact level of serotonin in order to not cause withdrawal. And there's some confusion about the words here. Like, we don't mean dependent as in addicted. It's not the same thing. And it's a silly argument that psychiatry throws at us when we call them dependence forming. I mean it in a literal sense, like in a dictionary sense, like you're dependent on taking your drug in your accustomed dose because what's luring underneath is withdrawal. So imagine removing the drug from one day to the next or tapering too fast. What happens is the body is slow. So remember, the body is still trying to adapt. The body is constantly trying to figure out what we're going to do to it. It's as biological, its principle as deep as gravity. Make us understand. So what happens if we make too big a change between what the body expects and what it gets? That's withdrawal. So you can think of withdrawal as this. Withdrawal is purely and simply a drug leaving the body faster than the body can adapt. But the body is still trying. It can't not try. It's still trying to adapt to that change. And when it can't adapt right away, it's sending signals. So withdrawal symptoms is the body's signal to us that we need to slow down, that we've given it too big a task for it to complete right away. Hope this makes sense. And that's where the tapering comes in. We want to, every time we reduce the dose, we actually disturb the balance in the brain. And as long as that disturbance is within the limits of what the body can tolerate, there'll be no withdrawal or mild withdrawal. But the bigger task you give it, the more symptoms it sends. And I could show you here easily with antipsychotics. It's the other way around. And any drug that has a minus on the table. So if we reduce a neurotransmitter, the body adapts by sending out more and making itself more sensitive to it. And if you then remove the drug from one day to the next, it causes withdrawal. So here you are less sensitive to something that there is now less of because you've removed the drug, and that's a withdrawal state. Here, it's just the reverse. So it's really just two principles you have to understand. Here, we are more sensitive to something that there's also more of. So your brain is flooded with dopamine while there being more dopamine receptors, and that's what causes the symptoms. So really the definition of what we're trying to get here is physiological dependence, and it just means a state of adaptation manifested by a drug class specific withdrawal syndrome produced by abrupt cessation or rapid dose reduction of the drug. And we have a lot of knowledge on the symptoms, and this is not just the list that I've just pulled out of the hat. This is systematic reviews trying to understand what are the symptoms of that withdrawal state. And I'm sure, as most of you know, the problem, as I said before, many of these symptoms, mostly those on the right, overlap with what you took the drug for or other mental health conditions, whereas the symptoms on the left is more like physiological, neurological. And I, of course, don't wish for anyone to have the symptoms on the left because they're so unpleasant, but there can actually be some value to having at least some physical withdrawal symptom that you can say without uncertainty, this is not me, this is not something I had before the drug. That can really help you trust that it's a withdrawal state. Because what we don't want to do, and this is what happens all the time, in the absence of knowledge about withdrawal and how severe it can actually be, people just, maybe they finally made it to a point in their lives when they felt ready to manage their lives without drug. And this can be a huge thing for people to dare reducing their drug. Maybe they went into therapy, changed their habits, changed their environment, their context, did all sorts of good things for themselves, felt ready. And then they came off the drug too fast and got in withdrawal, but without knowing. They just thought, okay, this is me underneath the drug. I'm still not ready. And maybe their doctor, also not aware of withdrawal, will also say, okay, that's proof that you still need the drug. Whereas in fact, it might just have been withdrawal, which is something completely different. That's just the body screaming for a slower taper. So you can see how withdrawal symptoms kind of create, they can create this illusion of effect where every time you stop the drug or come up too fast, you get symptoms. And then you think that's how you actually are underneath the drug. And then when you reinstate the drug, you get better again. And I should add, the typical client who comes to see me is someone who's tried to come off psychiatric drugs before and not made it because they got worse and then had to go back on a drug then they deep down didn't like taking. And then when we just do it slower, it works. They succeed in coming off according to the principles that are here now. So if you need some data, this is a study we did years back. You can see it's the duration on antidepressants. And then the circles are the incidence of withdrawal symptoms, and the squares are people who reported severe withdrawal symptoms. And I'm showing this because I don't know the situation in Israel, obviously, and I'd love to hear it and talk about it afterwards. But in the guidelines here in the US and the UK and in Denmark, most of this knowledge that I'm talking about here today has not reached practice yet. So they would still define withdrawal symptoms as mild and self-limiting and lasting about a week or two. And they would mention maybe 5 to 8 symptoms. So there's a huge gap between what we know from research and what's out there in practice, which is why so many people routinely get misdiagnosed as having a relapse instead of withdrawal, which is just sad because withdrawal is just the body's call for a slower taper. Withdrawal says nothing whatsoever about how you fare without the drug. And you can see from this graph that they're actually pretty normal. Like already after 10 and 20 months on the drug, it's normal to have withdrawal and even severe withdrawal effects from coming off. And you could see here the percentage of people choosing the most extreme level of severity of their withdrawal symptoms. When you ask them, about half would choose the most extreme option they get, for example, 7 out of 7. So withdrawal is a much bigger problem than it appears in the guidelines and in the mainstream psychiatry. So if you need to convince or show someone the data, here it is, and I'm happy to send you the references. Sorry, afterwards. Why does, oh, there's some audio here. Oh, sorry. So there was just some audio on my slides. I don't know if you could hear that. So really what tapering is about, tapering is called tapering because the goal is, instead of just stopping from one day to another, which means your body expects this but gets this, and it creates withdrawal from the gap, we want to introduce a series of smaller reductions that the body can handle. Now, the obvious question is, how much can the body handle? What's a small enough reduction for the body to not cause too much withdrawal? So we're really trying to limit the imbalances we create. To answer that question, we wanted to know the relationship between dose and effect. So in order to know how much to reduce the dose, we want to know the relationship between dose, which is it's just a weight. So dose in milligram is just the weight of the active ingredient in the drug. Now, that in itself says nothing about how much that drug does. So I hope it's clear for everyone here. It's not the dose in itself that we want to reduce gradually. It's what that dose does. It's the effect in the brain. And this was the primary paper in my PhD years back. So we can measure receptors in the brain. This will be the dose on the x-axis and the biological effect, not the experienced effect, but the biological effect. So how many receptors are blocked at a given dose? And this is percentage. And when we do that, and maybe you've seen these before, this is what Mark usually talks about too. This is called hyperbolic tapering. This is the main paper in my PhD. And when it comes to coming off psychiatric drugs in practice, what you do, this is the main graph to understand, because the whole point is that this is not a straight line. This means that, hyperbolic tapering is just called hyperbolic tapering because the curve that shows when we plot dose against effect happens to be a hyperbola, which this is. So you can see the difference between taking, and this is for Zoloft, and I'm going to get to the other drugs too. The difference between taking nothing, taking 0 milligrams, and taking just 10 milligrams is huge, because on average, half of your receptors are going to be blocked by the drug, which is a measure of the drug effect. So the difference between the 0 and 10 is huge. Add another 10 milligrams going from 10 to 20, there's still an effect, but it's less. Add another 10 from 20 to 30, still got to be an effect, but it reduces. So you can see, yes, the drug is stronger at higher doses, but the difference between the strengths are less than you'd imagine. So for each 10 milligram you add, or 1 or 5 or 100, depending on your drug, you could just convert it into your drug range. There's going to be less and less of a difference, and that's the point. Because remember, the body reacts to changes at the receptor level. That it's the change between what it expects and what it actually gets that causes the withdrawal. So say you are on 100 milligrams of Zoloft, and you were to taper by removing 10 milligrams at the time. So you go 90, 80, 70, 60, and so on. Don't do that. It's called linear tapering. What we have to understand is that the next 10 milligrams you remove are always stronger than the previous 10, even though both were 10. So the step from 90 to 80 is bigger than from 100 to 90. So you can be sure this is what happens 11 out of 10 times. There will be a reduction that, even though it wasn't bigger than the previous one in terms of milligram, it suddenly hits much harder. That just means that you've crossed this bend on the curve, meaning that that reduction caused a bigger change in receptor occupancy, the biological, than the previous ones. And the only thing that means is that your body's signal to slow down. So all you do when you find yourself in moderate or severe withdrawal from a reduction is that you up the dose a bit, and then the body's usually resolve, and then you go slower. And that's what causes tapering to sometimes takes years and years. Antidepressants, benzos, antidepressants, doesn't matter. Not necessarily because you have to wait for long between the reductions. You can, but that's not the main point. The point is that once you reach this steep part of the curve, you're forced down to making very small reductions in the 3, 5, 10% range. Because you can think of it like this. All we want to do when we come off psychiatric drugs is to follow this graph all the way down to 0. That means sometimes you can make bigger cuts in the beginning because you can see there's, on average, no real difference, which obviously means you can remove that part of the drug faster. And then when you reach the steep part, you can see the changes, the less medications in your system, which is obviously a good thing because that means you're closer to 0. The less medications in your system, the more your body can detect the differences. So whether you take 100 or 110 doesn't really matter, but whether you take 10 or 9 or 5 or 4.5 can have a huge difference. So the lower you get, the slower you have to go, and the more precise it has to go. So you can see what happens if you just imagine tapering with the doses that are available. If you just taper with the standard available dosages, 150, 100, 75, 50, 25, 0. It looks gradual if you just look at the dose, but if you look at the effect that those dosages correspond to, it's a whole different story. And this is what we mean by hyperbolic tapering. There can be many reductions between the lowest dose that you could buy at the pharmacy and even half of that and even quarter of that. There can still be many, many, many reductions between that and 0. And that can sound like bad news, like, okay, that's a negative story. Withdrawal is worse than we thought. Tapering takes longer than we thought. But I really hope that those of you out there who've tried coming off before using the standard doses and the standard guidelines and not succeeded, that you hear this as hope. Because maybe the way you felt from coming off was not you. It was a withdrawal state that calls for hyperbolic tapering. So I hope people will hear the positive message in this too, because it means that more people than we thought can come off their psychiatric drugs and probably get better in the process because they get themselves back. They get their inner compass back. They get their connection to themselves back, their emotions, provided we help them navigate that. That's why they come by. Okay, so this may look a bit confusing because I'm going to go over them a bit fast. This is just to show you that whatever psychiatric drug we take, the shape of this curve is going to be the same. It's universal. For those of you who want to understand the mechanisms, it's called the law of mass action, meaning that the majority of the effect of the drug is packed into a surprisingly small part of the dose. And this is universal. This is for benzodiazepines, antipsychotics, antidepressants, all of it. So, and these graphs that I'm showing you here is in the paper. If you just search my name and then cert, SERT, occupancy. There's going to be a paper from 21 in molecular psychiatry. It's open access. It's free. It's not behind a paywall, so you can find all these. I'm just showing them here to you rapidly to see that it's the exact same thing. No matter which drug you take, the lowest dose you can get without manipulating with it yourself is always going to be exactly on that bend thing, meaning that if you stop there, you're going to cause a huge disturbance in brain chemistry and hence withdrawal. And you can see here, this is the same data. And that's, sorry, I didn't translate that. You're going to get some of our like metning. That's a Danish word for occupancy, how much the drug blocks. So you can see here for antipsychotics, because I was asked to show the data for benzos and antipsychotics too. Imagine drawing a line between these dosages and a corresponding occupancy. You can see that it's the same. So you can see the step, say,
Andrés?
from Abilify. Yep.
You just talked about a specific website, right?
Not a website. I talked about a specific paper. If this was what you meant.
A paper. Yeah, okay. I just
So you
wanted
could
to
just
put a link or
you could just
Google.
Google. You could just Google it. It's on the top right here. My name, and then the name. Then you'll find it easily. I could just send it to you afterwards. It's the paper. Yeah.
Perfect.
And this
So
is
send
this is
everyone
just this is just I'll send it. This is just to show you. This is the same as the graphs show, but for antipsychotics. We don't have this in graphs yet, but you can still see that the drop from the lowest dose down to 0 will almost always cause withdrawal. So no matter which one of these you take, universal principle, which means that there are many reductions between that dose and 0. Just showing these to show you. I'll send these to you. I know it can look a bit confusing when the presenter, but it's really just to show the overall picture. This means in practice, we need to go lower than the lowest standard available dose. So we have to manipulate with the reality for many people coming off psychiatric drugs in practice is that they have to manipulate with the dosages, because remember, we want them to be extremely precise. So this one in the upper left corner, that doesn't work. As soon as the tablet starts looking by that, it's not going to work for tapering, because again, remember the principle. That's why I try to spend so much time educating people about the principles. It's still homeostasis. So when you reduce the dose, your body is trying to make sense of it's trying to adapt. It can't adapt if you give it different directions every day. So it needs to be the exact same dose. So the lower you go, the more precise it has to be. So using the pills when it starts to crumble is not going to work. Now, the solution to that, remember, the solution to withdrawal symptoms is tapering. And the graphs I showed you before, you can think of those as like the ideal. That's how the body ideally wants us to remove the drugs from it, following that curve. Now, when that meets practice, like the everyday life of someone coming off, that means we have to get smaller. And the way we'd usually do it is to dissolve it in water. All of this is described. It's described in the book. It's described on the internet, on various survivor groups. And if you need in your community kind of a one-pager or two-pager on how to do it, like the practical principles of how to get small enough dosages, I don't know if you have one. But if you don't, please, the organizers of this conference, reach out afterwards, and I'm happy to write one or just copy it to make it easier for people. So what we do really, say you are on 10 milligrams of something and you want to go down to 9. You can't do that with the tablet. It's too small and it's too strong. But as soon as you dissolve it in water, which most of the drugs are made for, look, it wouldn't work in the body if it didn't dissolve. So they're made for it unless they're extended release. But most of them are. Once it's dissolved, you're no longer bound by the standard tablet sizes. So all you do is you convert. So now you think in milliliters in terms of milligrams. So say you dissolve 10 milligrams in 50 milliliters, and then it's just percentage. If you want to remove 1 milligram, that's 10%. So you remove 10% of the water, meaning that going from 50 to 45 is the same as going from 10 to 9. So just really convert the unit. And if you dissolved it in 40, you'd remove 4. If you dissolved it in 30, you remove 3, and so on and so forth. So the important thing is not how much water you dissolve the pill in. The important thing is that you know how much you dissolve it in. So it has to be measured extremely. And this precisely, and this is weird. Let's just get it out there. It's an absurd situation to find yourself at your kitchen table dissolving tablets and using syringes and open capsules and beads. But as long as Big Pharma or not, and as long as mainstream psychiatry doesn't acknowledge withdrawal and the potency of these drugs at lower doses, this is the reality. Until they produce small enough dosages, this is going to be the way off for the people who've been taking the psychiatric drug for long enough to become dependent. This is not all. If you're taking it short term, this is not going to kick in, whatever short term is. And with benzos, it can happen extremely fast. Some people can come off psychiatric drugs without too much withdrawal. Some people's nervous system just so happens to be able to adapt faster. But most people's nervous systems will not. They will need gradual tapering. And it's an absurd situation to find yourself having to manipulate with the pills, but I can assure you it works compared to following the guidelines, which are really fast. I would be surprised if your guidelines in Israel would be updated to incorporate this. It's a very slow super tanker to change, but it works. This can be like day and night. Hyperbolic tapering can be like day and night compared to the rapid tapers. Now, this is what we'd call a busy slide. It means it has a lot of information packed into it. So you don't need, and too much too. You don't need to read this here now. I'll just extract some of the main points, and then I'll send this to you afterwards and then you can hopefully use it. So what you won't see me doing personally, not here, not in the field, you won't see me make these schemes saying, okay, if these suggestions, okay, if you're on this drug at this dose, reduce like so, like step 1, step 2, step 3, because I don't believe in it. I believe in explaining the principles of the body adapting and then the body having to readapt slowly by tapering. So what I want to do is share the principles and make people understand the principles of hyperbolic tapering. Okay, I understand that reductions have to get smaller and smaller. And I understand that at some point, the reductions have to be much smaller, down to the 3, 5, 10% reductions of the current dose. But we never know exactly when that point comes. So these graphs that I showed you before, it's really important for me to stress that's the average. So you can't, the mean, because when we do science, we do group data. So you can't just enter the graph of your drug and dose and say, okay, I have exactly this receptor occupancy. This means I can make exactly that reduction. Because whereas the shape of the curve is universal, we know it has that hyperbolic shape, but we don't know exactly when it starts to bend. So some people can make it all the way down to 50, sometimes even 40, 30 milligrams of Zoloft before they have to go slower. Whereas for others, it starts reacting with withdrawal already at 75 and 100. All we need to understand is what to do when that happens. Go back up and go slower. And that's what I mean with this, you reduce, stabilize, reduce, stabilize. And then you titrate your reductions against the level of withdrawal symptoms. And that's a lot of what I do. And in the book, all I try to do is try to take the reader through how I would do it, the principles I would use, hoping that people can then use it in their own lives. So one thing is, how often do you reduce? Sorry, the size of the reduction. The other one is then how long do you wait between reductions? And I have a very practical approach to that. So when you reduce the dose, one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to have symptoms that are then tolerable, manageable, which is what we go for. Easy. You reduce again once the symptoms have passed and you're ready. So for the clinicians out there, please understand tapering is patient-led. You can't force a scheme or a rule or a guideline on top of your patient. It's their pace that matters because it's such an individual process to go through. And if there are no symptoms, then usually you would wait, depending on the reductions, between 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks. It really depends on how big the reduction was. Yes. There's not going to be a universal pattern, meaning that for this drug, you're going to have exactly these symptoms, and they're going to appear on day 3, say. It's too individual. But there's usually going to be an individual pattern. For each person, there's usually going to be a pattern. Okay, I have these symptoms. They appear on day 4 or 3 or 6, and then they peak and then they taper off. And once you know your system, your pattern, it usually gets much easier to it introduces an element of control to the whole taper. And this one, just recapping, if severe and disabling withdrawal symptoms occur, respect it. Don't play hero. Don't force yourself through them. I've become convinced over the years, and I've done this for 10 years, the fastest way off is the slowest. There's no reason to push yourself through severe withdrawal. So you just reinstate the previous dose. Don't go above. Some people do that out of desperation. Reinstate the previous dose at which you were stable. Stabilize, and then taper slower down to the dose that caused you problems. Okay? It's only dangerous if you stay in severe withdrawal, like an obviously severe withdrawal, because it can get what we call protracted. I'm not going to go too much into that, but there's a lot of details on that out there because I'm really short on time now. So what I did want to show you also was, and I'll send these slides, you'll hear me talk a lot about managing withdrawal symptoms. So remember, the purpose of tapering is, of course, to avoid withdrawal symptoms. And sometimes we can avoid it completely. Oftentimes we cannot, because of how sensitive the nervous system is to change in the lower dose range, which are not lower. Because of how steep that curve is, for most people, it's not possible to avoid withdrawal completely. What we do is we want to minimize it, mitigate it to a level that is tolerable. So in the book and in my work usually, and if I had another hour, I would be talking almost exclusively about this. There's going to be an element of how to manage withdrawal. How am I going through periods of withdrawal in the best, healthiest possible way? And this is a slide on that. And if I just had to summarize it in 1 minute, it is what we would call to leave the symptoms alone. Most people will look for, or some people will look for things to add or take. What supplement can I add? What can I do to help my body fix withdrawal faster? And that's the wrong mindset. We have to reverse it. We have to understand that your withdrawal symptoms is like a wound or a broken leg. It means it self-regulates. The body knows how to heal itself, and it wants to heal itself. Our job is to taper slowly enough for it to not cause too much withdrawal, and then we leave it alone and interfere as little as possible. And what I mean with leave it alone is to try to teach yourself not to pay attention to it, which may sound this may sound like the other way around because it's painful. So it's your body is trying to drag your attention inwards. And I know it's 11 here now, it's by the hour, but please I hope it's okay that I just take a minute or two to discuss this. It's important because withdrawal is unpleasant. Our natural impulse will be to turn our attention inward and try to fix it and think a lot about it and do something about it. What I'm trying to help people do is the reverse. Withdrawal is just your body trying to make you take the dose it adapted to. If you overhear that signal for long enough, it'll stop. So the body will say, okay, maybe I'm the one who should adapt instead of trying to make him, her adapt. That's the talk of war going on. And that means that the best way through withdrawal is to learn how to leave them alone. And when I say leave it alone, the examples I would usually go for is we leave stuff alone all the time. I can mention you 2 examples just now that I'm sure you leave alone. For example, just to prove the mechanism, it feels a certain way to sit on your chairs or lie on your beds or stand on the floor. Like wherever you're in contact with the ground, it feels a certain way. There's a sensation there. Now, I'm relatively sure that before I said it, it wasn't part of your subjective awareness because it's a completely irrelevant stimuli. And there's another one too. We also, that characteristic sensation inside our mouths all the time. I'm sure you can feel it now. It's there. And actually, it's always there. It's never not there. So that was 2 examples of stimuli that I hope we can agree. I didn't just make them. I just mentioned them and pointed your attention towards them. Now, what does that prove? It proves that something can definitely be there without being there subjectively. And just imagine that's a mechanism. Your attention, it's something you can train. We can definitely learn how to control our attention in pain, in negative thoughts, in withdrawal symptoms. And once the symptoms are minimized to a tolerable level, what often happens is they also tend to step into the background when we leave them alone and focus outwards. And that's not distraction, guys. This is not distraction. This is not suppression. This is controlling attention. I'm sure you don't actively walk around suppressing or distracting yourselves from the feeling of being in touch with the chair and that sensation inside your mouth. Maybe there are some ambient sounds around you right now that you start hearing now and pay attention. I'm sure you don't go around actively suppressing it. It just happens when we leave it alone. And that's what most people will say, that the best way through is withdrawal, is to do something, figure out ways to be in flow around people, activities. And trust me, I believe this is exactly what's difficult to do when you're in withdrawal, because your body is so convinced that there's danger ahead that it causes withdrawal symptoms. It causes anxiety, intrusive thoughts, it lowers your mood, it makes you fatigued, it causes also other physical symptoms. These are all signs of a nervous system convinced that there's danger ahead because we've introduced too big a discrepancy. Now, if we understand that there's no danger ahead, it's no danger ahead, but it's just us knowing it, the best thing, and I'm going to end on this note, the best thing we can do, instead of arguing with our bodies and thinking and suppressing and all sorts of things, which is our natural inclination to do, it's the normal thing to do, but it adds to stress. The best thing we can do if we want to show our body that it's safe is to act accordingly. So I go through a lot of different exercises in the book that teaches you how to do this, control your attention in the midst of pain. I really hope this makes sense for people out there. And yeah, we didn't get to that point. This was my talk. I hope it wasn't too confusing. I was trying to bridge both the technicalities of tapering with how the drugs work, with how to manage withdrawal in an hour. And if you like the work, please, I hope to see you out there on Facebook, Instagram. I'm trying to build a Substack. I have a lot of free articles on the topics we talked about here today. And yeah, I just hope this was helpful. And let's get into the questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Anders. We have like 25 minutes for you more, so we can do the questions, and if you have something more to add, so you can do it.
Great.
So you can go through the Q&A. Do you seeing it, this feature, the Q&A feature in the Zoom?
I think it would be easier. I think it would be easier if you could just let me see. So I only see 3 comments in here. Are there more questions than that?
No, there are
it's not.
There are like 15.
Okay, I can't see that. I can't see. Can you read them aloud? Just pick some and read them aloud.
If you are press on more on yours on more in your screen, there might be the the feature of Q&A.
Oh, there. Oh, there. Yeah, I just looked at the comments. I see. And I hope they're all in English. They are. Okay, so how do you usually go about it? Do I just pick some and answer, or do you take some?
Yeah, I think if you want to just to scroll and then pick some questions that you
Okay.
can answer. Okay.
And then if you
Yeah.
have some questions, you too, you could just, I don't know, do you have some questions on the talk that we should talk about too?
Yeah, I have, but you can go with this and then we'll see.
Okay, great. Okay, perfect. Sorry. So,
You can choose
So,
the short one. We know that you won't get all of them, so.
yeah, I'll make, these are good questions. I'll just bring them with me and do a Substack, something. I'd like to answer them all. Okay, so how do you understand the placebo effect during the process of reducing psychiatric medicine? How do you understand the placebo effect when coming off? Important. There's a question about that. Sorry, there's a chapter 6 in the book is about exactly that. So the way I would go about it is to say that any conversation about psychiatric drugs, whether taking them or coming off them, is not just a conversation about chemistry and medicine. It's also the stories we attached to being medicated and labeled and taking medication. So there's more to it than the actual medication. And I think that's where the placebo effect comes in. Now, you can be sure that the symptoms are real. It's not just something you expect and therefore it comes. They're absolutely real biological things. So it's not just something the patient makes up. But obviously, the more you expect the symptoms will be there, you can kind of, what we don't want to happen, that's what I'm trying to say. What we don't want to happen is that you monitor excessively for the symptoms because you've seen the list of all the withdrawal symptoms. You start checking, do I have this symptom? Do I not? Withdrawal will present itself, believe me, if it's there. So we really try to help people not dig too much after it, analyze, don't monitor for it. It will show itself because otherwise the placebo effect, or which is then actually called the nocebo effect, will kick into gear. But where I understand placebo in terms of taking the drugs is that the story you can come to tell yourself about yourself of being defective, broken, ill, crazy, sometimes that needs to taper off too, actually. And that's part of the placebo effect because it's about what comes to expect. I'm not sure I described this so well now, but there's a whole chapter in the book about it, that sometimes we have to kind of change those stories about ourselves because obviously if you attribute all your healing to the medication you took, and if you see yourselves as fundamentally ill or broken, those beliefs in themselves will make it harder to come off the drug because within those beliefs, you're removing a drug that's helping you and you're removing something that fixes something in you. And that's why we need to change those beliefs too. Whereas and placebo is the effect of like expecting things. That's why I combine these things. Whereas if you just look at the drug as a drug, it's just a strategy. It may or may not have been helpful in a crisis, but it's just a strategy that you're removing and not some central part of you. Coming off it can obviously become easier. So I'm not sure how how precise that was, but there's a section of that in the book. Okay, thank you so much, as someone is saying. I'm tapering off Favoxil. I need to know what that is in Danish. Sorry. Fluvoxamine. Sometimes they have different names. Yeah, good question. So the question is, I'm just going to read it out. I'm tapering off Favoxil. I'm on 10 milligrams, but my scale no longer able to accurate these dosages. Is it critical if I take 10 milligram one day, 8 on the next day, and then 9 etc. because the inaccuracy of the scale? Very important question, because yes, that is important. It's really important. Don't skip dosages. Like the idea of taking 10 and then 8 and then 9 Or I hear some people taper by taking 10 5 days a week and then 9 2 days a week. And you'd see, like, if you understand the mechanisms I talked about, the homeostasis, if you understand the underlying mechanism, which is that the body is constantly trying to adapt what we do to it, that's the mechanism. Well, then you'd see why changing the doses or skipping doses is a bad idea, because you're giving the body different directions. So how is it ever going to adapt? The body can't do its thing if you confuse it with different dosages. And I know this is an advice out there. It's a common thing doctors recommend. And I even have a Substack article out of it, and you can take it and translate it into your language if you want. Feel free, of how this confuses. So the solution is always dissolve. Don't use a scale. It's more imprecise. You're going to be limited by the low numbers. Just dissolve the 10 milligrams, and that allows you to go 10, 9.5, 9, 8.5, and so on and so forth. So don't skip dosages. Don't take different doses. It only confuses the nervous system, causing withdrawal, and it doesn't know what to adapt to. So really, really important point there. What is the most effective way to taper off antidepressants without withdrawal symptoms? I hope that's what I've been talking about all day. That is, just to recap, to reduce the dose gradually and slowly towards 0, doing it in a way that follows that shape of the curve. Problem is, we can't see the curve. You can't see your individual personal curve before you break it, so to say. You only know the overall shape. So that's what I tried to describe before. Tapering is predictable and unpredictable at the same time. Let me explain that. It's predictable in the sense that you know that reductions have to get smaller and smaller. We know that. It's universal. What you don't know is exactly at what dose you need to make them smaller. You'll figure out when you make too big a reduction and wake up in severe withdrawal, and you then reintroduce the dose. So whereas the main message here from me, from anyone working in the field, from the data, I'm sure from you, since your organization is called responsible tapering, so that's what I read into it. The main message is that coming off antidepressants and psychiatric drugs takes longer than we thought, and the reductions need to be smaller than we thought, but not all the way down. So if you're on a very high dose, clearly on that plateau on the curve I showed you, and if you start the 5% reductions already there, you're going to prolong the taper unnecessarily, because there's no difference between the dosages up there. So there you can make some bigger cuts. You just don't know exactly when to slow down. So I hope that that was a question to that. So you come off it slowly, you understand the hyperbolic principles, you try as best as you can to follow it. And maybe if you've tried to come off before, most people have, if you have previous failed taper attempts in your baggage, maybe you'll have an idea of when problems started to occur. Maybe it was when you went from 20 to 5 or whatever. So you have some individual knowledge that oftentimes that's going to be where problems arise again. Yeah. What should you do when you reach the smaller doses, like 2, 1, if no liquid formulation is sold? Is it better to keep cutting the pills or to prepare your own liquid? Definitely, and without a doubt, to prepare your own liquid. There's nothing special or magical about the liquid forms, the liquid formulations that are sometimes made from the pharmacy. It's the same thing. And actually, the concentration, at least in Denmark and the US, the concentration of the liquid formulations that are sold are often too strong too. So even if you have the liquid formulations, people end up having to even dilute that further. And then you end up in the exact same situation as with the tablets. definitely the worst of these options is to keep cutting the pills. Not going to work. You're going to find yourself in severe withdrawal from the cuts, which I hope makes sense to everyone here. To prepare your own liquids. Exactly.
Andres, I do have a question for you about
Yes.
protracted and
Yes.
and severe withdrawal symptoms. How do you manage and how do you hold hope for people in this condition? And
Really good.
what are you offering to those people that are cannot like reverse or like
Yes.
really?
Great. Great question. Let's go. And I skipped that a bit before, and then with the purpose of taking it up here, if you asked it. So just for everyone to understand, this is a huge part of what we do, us working with tapering in the field. Half of, or some of the referrals we get is emails who ask, how do I taper? And the other half of the, maybe even more actually, because the guidelines look as they look, these are people who've already tapered too fast and find themselves in severe withdrawal. And now back to the dose increase. Remember, if you make a reduction and find yourself in severe withdrawal, the solution is to up the dose, and the body is very thankful. The symptoms usually just stop. But what we have to understand is, so there we use increasing the dose as a tool. It's a valid method because tapering is unpredictable. What we have to understand is that there appears to be a window of reinstatement. It can be days, it's usually weeks. So there is a window where increasing the dose works. After that window, we don't know how long it is, the body will not accept taking the dose, even though it's clear withdrawal. And that's what we would call protracted withdrawal. It means that it's still withdrawal induced, but you've now stayed in it for too long, probably because you didn't know it was withdrawal. So you've stayed in withdrawal. The body has tried to make you take the dose again. It's been screaming at you with symptoms, but you didn't listen because you didn't know what it was. And now it just kind of stuck. And that's what's the danger of protracted withdrawal. It means we can't up the dose. In fact, it can sometimes make it worse because of kindling effects. So the question is, what do we do when we find ourselves in protracted withdrawal? I've come to, and a lot of what we do, and you even ask of that, is the hope thing. And I want my main message here to be that it does heal. Protracted, severe withdrawal does heal, but it can take a long time. And we can't, I don't think personally that we can intervene. We can't enter the nervous system and speed up the processes. I don't believe much in a lot of supplements. And what most people fall for is that they'll find a supplement that acts on the same neurotransmitter as the drug did, thinking that will help the system. What often happens is it actually perturbs the system. Now the system reacts to you, perturbing it. So time and a very long hold and finding someone who understands protracted withdrawal and teaches you how to, the hard art of accepting and allowing and understanding that it's not permanent. Because what a lot of people find themselves in, and this is where I couldn't imagine any worse situation than this, being in severe withdrawal, akathisia, pain, low mood, anxiety, not sleeping, whatever your withdrawal symptom is, being in that pain, and on top of that, believing it's permanent. Like there's no worse psychological cocktail than that. So what we can't do, we can't stop the symptoms right away. What we can do, we can work on the psychological level, helping people see that this is not permanent. It may look permanent, but it's just because it's long term. And the closest thing we get is, what are these called? Like concussions, for example, like physical concussions. That's the closest area of medicine that I can put. That it's completely accepted that can take years to heal. Now, what we can do, so we can't speed it up. What we can do is we can provide the best possible conditions for the body to heal. And now mostly, and I talked about this last week at the Encompass Initiative conference, mostly that's about removing things. So you have to reverse the logic. Instead of introducing something to the body and taking or doing something that heals faster, we have to give the body fewer tasks, because remember, the body knows how to heal itself and it wants to heal itself. Our job is more to step out of its way and give it the best possible conditions to heal instead of doing stuff. And one of the things we can control is diet, of course. So think of it this way. The more tasks you give the body, if your body both has to heal withdrawal, protracted withdrawal, and it has to deal with sugars and carbs and artificial sweeteners and pesticides and blood glucose crashes. Think of it this way. It would be the same as if I gave you two important tasks you had to do at the same time. Obviously, you'd have to prioritize what you do. So this is the way I try to help people think about protracted withdrawal. Sometimes changing diet. A lot of people find it, I got to even go full keto, to like remove sugars completely, because then you give the body less tasks. So that's the way I would approach it. And sometimes, let's see if I hope that makes sense. It's more about removing things to give your body more ability to focus on fixing withdrawal instead of adding things. The other thing, what was that I just thought about? I can't remember. There was another thing. I'll write to you when I get to it. So it works. And there are even coaches out there. Angie, for example, Angie Peacock, who I'm with, just happened to be right now, has whole support groups specifically for people in protracted withdrawal. So there's a whole community around this. Like, one thing is, how do we taper correctly to begin with? And how do we manage the emotional parts of coming off? But the third part is, that's why I like you asked this question. Okay, then what about the people who already tapered too fast and found themselves in severe withdrawal? What do we do? So yeah, that's a whole literature around that. That's a very long answer, but hear it as hope. The body's healing. It is healing, and it knows how to fix it. It just takes way longer than we thought. So not adding hopelessness, not adding rumination, not fighting it, not adding worry, changing your diet, do the best you can for your body to heal itself. That's the best things you can do. And surround yourself with people who understand it, because the public debate and mainstream psychiatry will not understand this. So again, this adds to the distress. You're in a painful situation that it's really difficult to explain to someone who hasn't been through it or works with it what that is. It's so far out of what most people believe these drugs can do that it's difficult. So often people find themselves arguing and defending and reasoning with people because they don't believe in it. So surround yourself with people who understand would be my final advice. I hope that made sense as a very long answer to that.
Yes, but you covered a lot with this answer. I think it covers a lot. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, one more question, and
so yeah, I could answer all these. I love the questions. I love questions. Okay, so here's a question. If predictable symptoms appear after tapering, what you need, oh, I need to move it. What you need to do is just to keep things in perspective and wait for the body to stabilize. Yes. So in this situation, when it's not severe, when it's tolerable, whatever that means for you, and you trust that it's going to pass, it's temporary. So when you're in a situation, you've made a reduction, you have symptoms, you trust they'll pass, then what do you do? And exactly, you just keep things in perspective. That means you rise above, you go mindful on it. You're in a healthy way, you detach yourself from your symptoms. And you don't follow all the what if thoughts, and you don't follow all your mind's attempts to interpret it as something dangerous. Yes. Then you wait. And that sounds like such a vague advice. Just wait. But there's wisdom. It's clever, because the more you try to engage with it and fix it, the more problems you're going to cause. So what we have to understand is the body is inherently self-regulating. And what you need to do is you have to accept that the body knows how to heal it. Your job is, 1, not to interfere, 2, not to fear it, because the symptoms can feel extremely frightening if you don't know what they are. That's why I spent 30 minutes of this talk talking about how the drugs work and how the body adapts and how it screams if you make too big a reduction. Because not knowing these mechanisms, obviously, it's going to be more difficult to just leave them alone. If you have no clue what the symptom is, what the brain is doing, that it's in fact healing, of course, it's going to be difficult to just leave it alone. But once you understand the mechanisms, I find it gets easier to be with them. And then instead of just wait and sit around and wait all day, do stuff, figure out ways to focus outwards. Your body will try to get your attention inwards because your body thinks there's a problem. You know there's no problem. You know it's just withdrawal. The best thing you can do is learn how to train that attention muscle and do things. Talk to friends, figure out things to do, and then I'm sure you'll see that just as those sensations I mentioned before of the mouth and sitting here and some ambient sounds, symptoms too will step into the background, and that's the easiest way through. Yeah.
Andres, there's a question that I see that is repeating itself, and
Yep.
Also it is connected to this one.
Yep.
One is like, are there irreversible brain damages in cases when the taper is not slow enough? And another one is, after finishing with the medicine, do our character traits and sense of humor get back to themselves?
Yeah, I like that. I don't think there are irreversible brain damages. I haven't seen one. What I think there is injuries. We could use the word injury as long as you don't hear there's something permanent. Shocks, even. I would just call it a shock. Like, once you understand, you can shock the nervous system so much that it keeps sending signals for months or years. So I don't like the word irreversible or permanent. It's just the time frame is long. And you'll see this from people who've tried it. And people like Angie and other people having these groups have tried it. So they can talk about it from a personal level in a way that I can't. And they will say also they too felt it was permanent, half a year off, 1 year off, 2 years off, but it was actually gradually improving. So no, I personally do not think there's irreversible brain damage. I think there is symptoms that take a long time for the body to heal. And that's just the idea of them being irreversible. It's really, the psychologist in me will say that it's really difficult to heal something and improve if your overall belief is that it's permanent, because it's so hopeless. Like, how to have hope in something you believe is irreversible. So I think that hope in itself, not just some fluffy, we choose to be positive, but genuine hope. Your body's trying to fix it and it knows how to fix it. So that's a very long way of saying, no, I don't see it being irreversible. And a lot of what I do, again, because the guidelines are as they are, half the drug, half the dose, half it again, stop, taper over a couple of weeks. Most of the clients we see, us working in this field, are people who've tapered incorrectly. So I see it every day, helping them through over months and years, that it improves. Good. So the other question was the other way around, as far as I heard it. Will my sense of humor and stuff return? Yes.
But I think
Yes,
that
it will.
your answer now will be the last one, because we still
Yes,
have...
let's do it again. And that's good to end. And I could continue this for hours, and we'll just do it again. Let's figure out some ways to do it. I love answering people's questions. And yes, it will. Yes. So again, let's end on this note. What we have to understand is that psychiatric drugs, they're what we call unspecific drugs. So while we call them anti this and anti that, It's not that the drug with surgical precision enters the brain and removes the psychosis or the anxiety or the depression. That's not how they work. They numb all sorts of things. Also the things you don't want numbed. Joy, motivation, drive, spirituality, creativity, humor, all these things. That's how the drugs work. That's why they can be beneficial in an acute crisis situation. But long term, you'd see why it can be difficult to be cut off from those things. So obviously, yes, once you understand that the drug, it doesn't remove anything, it doesn't delete anything, it doesn't fix anything, it just numbs or alters. Then the answer to that question is yes, of course, when you remove whatever numbs it, it is going to resurface. But again, if you taper too fast and cause a severe withdrawal reaction, then maybe your spirituality and your creativity and your humor returns, but it's still underneath. Like, does that make sense? If withdrawal is too severe, that's what you're going to feel. So even though a drug crushed your humor and you remove the drug, if you remove the drug in such a way that causes withdrawal, then you're probably not going to feel all those good things returning, because now your body's just in withdrawal. So they'll be on the other side of withdrawal, which is the main reason to taper slowly. And when you do, yes, whatever was there before, I can't see the situation where the the drug has effectively deleted it. Okay, now you're not a humorous person anymore. Now you're not a joyful person anymore. It just covers it up. It can't delete it. You're still down there underneath. And maybe that's a good note to end with.
Okay, Anders, thank you so much for being with us today, for your time and your kindness and all your information. I think it was very helpful and great for a lot of people here.
I'm glad to hear that. And
so
if we can collaborate in the future or stuff to do, or
we will, sure. We will.
And if you can figure out a way to translate the book into your language, let me know. I'm happy to. If you know a publisher or something, please.
I'm sure. I'm sure we're gonna do it. It's already in progress.
I also want to
let me know and just.
On that note, thank you to שירה. You're a champion. I adore you. איזה אלופה שתרגמת ככה במקביל, באמת, כל הכבוד. The translator.
Oh yeah, of course, yes. Yeah. Thanks so much. Sorry for it forced me to speak slowly. I guess that's good.
If that's your slowly, what's your fast?
You should hear. You should hear. No, sorry.
Okay.
Cool.
So thank you. We will now continue to our groups.
Thank you so much. It was fascinating.
Yes. Reach out. See you on Facebook and Substack and everything. And let me know. See you again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.